Hello, Noel Harrison there in England. Thanks, Noel, for taking time to talk with us. Noel, what we normally do is we ask about the person's family. Now, the thing is, we are aware of your father. We've heard of your father. I just want to ask you, when you were born, was your father, Rex, was he already famous?
Just starting for him. Just starting to do well. In fact, I remember our accommodations upgrading in my first years quite dramatically.
But he divorced from your mother when you were quite young.
Yes, they split up in 1940 when I was 6.
How did you first become interested in music? Because you're also a sports star as well. So, well, actually, what came first?
The music. I always enjoyed music, as a kid and everything. I used to live in even further west than this in England, in Cornwall, during the war with my grandparents. And they had 3 daughters, all of whom had record collections. So I started early listening to music. We had one of those old radiograms with a changer that would take 6 or 8 78 RPM records, which would come clacking down and, onto the next one without breaking.
And what did you listen to, Noel?
I listened to Bing Crosby. I listened to Leslie Hutchinson, who was quite a star here back in the 30s. And I listened to anything I could get hold of, really.
At that time, were you aware of your father's fame? Because as a young child, suppose maybe you weren't, or did that mean anything?
Oh, yes. In fact, they didn't tell me about the separation or the divorce. And I went to school one day when I was 6, and the other kids started teasing me that my parents were divorced, and I ran home to my grandmother crying, and she had to tell me it was true. So they read it in the paper. You see, it started early.
It's a bit different these days. There'd be counselling and support for the child or the children.
Oh, yes, there wasn't anything like that, but my grandmother was lovely with it.
You went to live with your mother and grandmother, is that correct?
My mother's parents.
And where were they, Noel?
They were in Cornwall, in North Cornwall on the Atlantic coast.
Did father come visiting, or was he too busy doing his acting and all that?
I didn't see a lot of him during that. I saw him occasionally during the war. He was in the RAF for a while. In fact, the other day I did a gig in a village near here, and the man who organised it was in the Royal Australian Air Force during the war, and he happened to sit in a railway carriage coming down from Liverpool opposite my father, told me, dressed as a flight lieutenant in the RAF.
It's a small world.
Yeah.
So you were listening to records? Were you encouraged to pick up an instrument?
I never picked up an instrument never thought about it. I did learn the piano. My grandmother had a small Steinway baby grand, and she told me if I learned the piano I could have it, but it didn't really work for me. So I didn't pick up another instrument until I was 15 at school, and I had a friend who had a guitar, and another friend who had a tenor banjo. And the friend who had the guitar didn't know how to play it, so I learned the banjo chords on the guitar initially. That was how I started. And the first song I learned was Buttons and Bows from a Bob Hope film called The Paleface. Buttons and bows, east is east and west is west, and the wrong one I have chose. Let's go where they keep on wearing those silks and satins and linen that shows and rings and things and buttons and bows. There you are.
I never forget. So you've got a keen interest in music, but also, I suppose, being a champion skier, you would have had to put a lot of time into that as well. What
happened, my mother moved to Switzerland in 1948 when I was 14 and fell in love with a ski instructor. So that was very handy, and I got free skiing lessons, and I took to it very quickly. And by 1952, I was in the British team.
Well, that means you're pretty good.
Yeah, well, being in the British team actually is not that brilliant. It's certainly an honour. I lived in this ski resort, and they had a team, the ski resort, that raced in various races, and I wasn't quite good enough to get on the first team for the ski resort, but I was good enough to be in the Olympics for Britain. That about sums it up.
Well, that's all right. You were no Eddie the Eagle then.
No.
Did you still get time to practice, or how did the music interest keep going on from there?
It was quite a coincidence. There were 3 of us in the Alpine team in 1952, and both the other guys also played guitar, so we were actually 3 guitar pickers.
And so what, you jammed together and...
Yeah, we taught each other songs and stuff like that.
Did you play at the chalets?
We were in Norway then, yeah. But, yeah, we played when we could.
I assume you retired from the sport, and then... Was there an idea or an ambition to sing professionally or to be a professional entertainer?
Well, it came about when I came out of the Army in 1954 after my national service, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a movie director, but I couldn't get a job. I tried to get a job in the cutting rooms in a studio here, but all they offered me was a job in the public relations department because of my father, which was slightly annoying. So a friend of mine, I don't think he's known in Australia, but Cy Grant is a West Indian. He died last year, West Indian folk singer and actor. And he said, why don't you go and play the guitar somewhere? So I went to a Cypriot restaurant in the King's Road, Chelsea in London, and offered them my services. And I got engaged for 10 shillings a night and a free meal. So that was my first job, really. I liked it, and I kept on doing it.
I've been looking not only at your website, but the Windmills of Your Mind website, which is a great fan site. Around 1959, you did some recording, calypso style. How did that come about, from the restaurant to recording a few songs?
1959, it was actually, I think, the calypsos I actually recorded in Milan about 1957.
Were you still skiing then?
Well, I spent that winter in the ski resort in 57, and I only actually went skiing about 3 times when the snow was perfect. I was sort of skied out at that point. I stopped competing in 56.
How did you come to record in Italy?
Because I was singing in Italy in the summer in Portofino. I was singing in a little bar there on the port 2 summers in a row. And somebody from the record company recorded it, heard me and said, oh, come and record some stuff. So I did.
So what happened after Milan? You recorded these little singles?
They didn't mean anything. They didn't do anything
No.
or go anywhere. But what happened was the man I spoke to you of before, Cy Grant, the West Indian folk singer, he was singing on a BBC program called The Tonight Program, which came on after the news. It was a commentary on the day's news. And they used to have, because the calypso craze was in full swing, and Cy Grant used to sing the news in calypso at the beginning of the program, a calypso version of the day's news. And he alternated with another couple of folk singers, and they quit. And so he got hold of me and asked me if I wanted to do it. And I did. I went back to England and started singing the news in calypso every night, alternate weeks.
What a novel idea.
Yeah.
I assume that would have opened a few doors for you?
Yes, it did. I started playing clubs in London and big nightclubs and everything, and doing cabaret and doing private parties and making a fairly decent living at it. About that time I got married too, so I started having kids. My living, playing music, and basically, other than although I've made more money as an actor over my life, that's really when I started playing music, and I've never stopped.
I noticed also that, like you mentioned, that you were starting to get acting gigs as well.
Yeah, well, a little bit in England. The acting stuff didn't take off until I moved to the States in 1965. I got a part in a television series called The Girl from U.N.C.L.E.
Your first solo album, Noel Harrison, that would have been in England, is that correct there, Noel?
Yeah. See, when I went to the States, they picked up on a song called A Young Girl, which was a Charles Aznavour song. Another friend of mine had done an English translation of it, and that got picked up in the States, stayed on the charts for quite a long time.
Your debut album, had that been recorded already, or just that song?
No, the album had been recorded too. So I was with London Records. London Records was my first label, and then they were, I forget what they were in the States, whether they were London or whether, anyway. And after I had that successful record, I was put under contract in America to Reprise, Warner Brothers Reprise, for 5 years.
When Reprise signed you, is that when you went over to the United States?
No, I went over before that. I went over to the United States to play really nightclubs, and because I had this successful record at the same time, I made quite a lot of noise. So that's when I got the record contract in the States, and that's when I got the television show. And really, my career absolutely took off when I moved to the States.
Back in those days, you would have been an English citizen? There was no visa problems, working visa or anything like that?
I went as an immigrant, as a green card. Much easier in those days if you were English. The quota was very large for English people, and without any problem, I got immigration status for myself and for my wife and our kids.
So you took the whole family over. And where did you live there, Noel?
Initially in New York for about 6 or 7 months, and then I got the TV show, so we moved to Los Angeles. I always enjoyed it, I had a great time. I died and gone to heaven. I was in a TV show. I was becoming a very well-known face and had a wonderful time. And also the other thing was that was the period of the so-called British invasion with the Beatles and everything. I was considered to be part of that.
And so you were recording the albums for Reprise, and did they send you out on tours to promote the records? What did they do, Noel? Or what did you do?
I did a couple of tours. I did a little brief tour with Sonny and Cher, and then I did quite a couple of fairly extended tours with the Beach Boys. I made good friends with Mike Love. We used to hang out quite a lot.
The Reprise albums, I think they're great albums. Collage. Did you have a lot of control in choosing the songs chosen?
Oh, no, absolutely. They were all my choices. The only song I didn't choose myself to do in my career was Windmills. Funnily enough. I just want to mention a particular song I love off the Collage album. It's a psychedelic song, full-on psychedelic, Sign of the Queen, and it's actually on a few of these psychedelic compilations, which is where I came across it. So now, where did that come from, Noel? Sign of the Queen. Can't remember the name of the guys who wrote it, but it was something I heard it, and thought, oh, I'd love to do that. And then we used the sitar, and we used a reverse cymbal track and all kinds of psychedelic stuff on it.
Did you have any training, voice training at all, or you were all self-taught?
I was in the choir at school before my voice broke. Taught me how to pitch it, but really I'm self-taught mostly. I've taken more voice lessons in the past 6 years than I ever have in my life before. quite surprised I didn't take them earlier.
Los Angeles, well, we refer to the 60s these days as the swinging 60s, and just reading a bit of your blog on your website, it had its upside, but it also had a downside that you mention on the blog, phony people, that sort of thing.
I'm not quite sure which complaint you're referring to.
By the end of the 60s, you seemed you'd had enough. And
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, because my father was a famous actor and a celebrity, I always thought that I wanted to be one. But actually, when I got it, I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. I found the lack of privacy daunting, and being recognized everywhere you go. After a while, I liked sitting and looking at people, and I wasn't really able to do that because I'd look at people and they'd say, "Hey, aren't you?" The worst experience was I was on a theater tour, and I was in some town in Ohio, this hotel, in the afternoon, lying by the pool, and I was half asleep, and I was kicked awake by a teenage girl who said, "My dad said to come and ask you for your autograph." I decided it was great in so many ways, but I decided I wanted to do something completely different. And also my first marriage came to an end, and I went off and lived in eastern Canada, second wife, built my own house, and was a back-to-land hippie kind of person.
obviously your father enjoyed the fame.
It used to irritate him a bit too, I mean, I remember somebody saying to him in a crowd, "Hey, aren't you Rex Harrison?" "No."
Well, he was still performing. He came to Australia not long, maybe a year or two before he died, and was doing
Yeah, he
shows.
did, I know.
Shows here. He had his little earpiece, but I think he did well.
He did beautifully. Yeah, he was performing up until about, less than 2 months before he died.
It would have been a pretty sort of drastic move because you were very successful. You had records out. All three of those reprise albums are great records. So you really must have had enough. I mean, did you understand the fact that once you've got this fame that it can be hard to get back? Or you just didn't care anymore?
I really wanted to change my life, and I'm very glad I did. I mean, that was the most wonderful period of my life when I lived up there. I learned to be a self-sufficient person. I learned to work in the woods and cut down trees with a chainsaw and build a house and grow food and everything that I hadn't learned earlier in my life. It was a priceless period. I mean, I was still performing. I was still playing music, and I still would go out, tour in plays and stuff. That was my main source of income. I'd go out on tour in the States in the summer and make a bunch of money and then come back home and go back to being a simple guy in Canada.
I've also got here that your house burned down.
Yes, it did, yeah.
What happened there?
Well, the thing is that everyone cooks with wood. So it was a very rural area. Nobody had central heating. We had a wood cook stove, and I wasn't used to that. And the stove has a stovepipe that comes up out the back and went up into the upstairs room and then into the chimney. And stovepipes are quite tricky. People in Australia may be aware of that. If you burn the wrong kind of wood, it gets all coked up, and if you set fire to it, it'll go off like a jet taking off and turn red hot. And that's basically what happened. We had a stovepipe fire, which became a chimney fire. Well, the stovepipe actually got so hot it set fire to some clothes in the room upstairs, and that was off it went.
Who was in the house at the time? Yourself?
Yeah, myself, my wife and kids, some friends from the States who were visiting.
All right, but you all had time to escape?
Oh, yeah, we all got out fine. There's a song about that I wrote called The Middleton Fire Brigade.
There's a couple of songs on the fan site, on the Noel Harrison fan site, from the Mount Hanley song album. One in particular, Wild Child, is just... That really knocked me out. I thought that was such a superb...
Did it? Oh, thank you.
No, that is a brilliant song. Because I was very impressed with your 60s stuff, especially Sign of the Queen. But just such a brilliant, heartfelt song. And it caught me by surprise because when somebody's musician or artist takes a long break, they get a bit rusty and their return usually doesn't set the world on fire. But I just...
No, you see, it was different for me because one of the reasons that I left was that I really was getting known as an actor and I wanted to be known. A lot of people thought that I did records in the 60s because I was in a television show, and I wanted to re-establish myself as a musician and performer, and that's what I went and did in Canada, really. I never stopped, actually. I never disappeared.
Listening to that song, I was just surprised that there weren't more original songs on your 60s albums.
Well, I only just started writing then. I didn't realize I could until the first one I wrote was Bleach on the Beach, which is the B-side of the single of Windmills of Your Mind over here. That was a song I wrote about after seeing a Donovan concert.
Now, tell us a little bit about Windmills of Your Mind. Michel Legrand wrote the music for the film The Thomas Crown Affair, and he wrote the music for that song, and I think Alan Bergman wrote the lyrics. So how did it come to that song, or it came to you? Can you tell us a little bit about it, Noel?
Yeah, it came to me, and basically I had a single out of Suzanne, the Leonard Cohen song, around that time, and the director, Norman Jewison, heard me sing and thought I'd be just the ticket for that song, so he phoned up my agent and got me.
Simple as that.
The scale, $500.
No royalties?
Performance royalties. I didn't write it, but some performance royalties. Doesn't matter, I didn't make a lot of money out of it. It certainly made a difference to my life, especially in the UK.
Here in Australia, that's probably what you're best known. And old Norman Jewison, he's a Canadian himself.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
So what did you think of the film? Did you see the film?
Oh, yes, I did. Yeah, I love the film. I love the way they used the song. One of the most interesting things about that score is that usually a director makes a movie and then the score is written to the edited version. But Thomas Crown Affair was edited to the score. Michel wrote the score before the film was edited. I love the sequence with the glider and the song on it. I think that's heaven.
And have you seen Pierce Brosnan produced a remake with Rene Russo? Have you seen that one, Noel?
Yeah, I was actually on the other night. I hadn't seen it, and I was watching it. I thought Sting did a beautiful job with the song, actually. It was really interesting to hear him.
I loved all the split screens while watching the film. I thought that was great.
That was all the rage back then, wasn't it?
That was all the rage, and it would have been very difficult to do without digital. It would have all been done optically.
It started with a movie called Grand Prix.
I enjoyed Norman Jewison's version better myself, but that's just
I
me.
did too. I certainly enjoyed the film better.
No, let's jump now. Mount Hanley song, great album, but obviously it didn't set the world on fire. Maybe your commercial career, music career, or was it promoted? Who released the record?
No, it was released by a Canadian company called True North.
It was released worldwide or just in Canada?
I think probably just in Canada. I did a television show in Canada called Take Time at that point, my own television show about songwriters.
Did you interview songwriters?
Yeah, we had every week a singer-songwriter, half-hour show, we concentrated on the one person.
Like Gordon Lightfoot or somebody like that?
Gordon didn't do it ever, but Tommy Macon did it. What's his name? Oh, Sina. Jesse Winchester, who did it, and that's how I got to know his music. And we had a season and a half. I can't remember the names of all the people, and I think probably CBC have destroyed all the tapes. Because one of the comments on the show was the very 60s. I think it was like in the early 70s. It was probably the most hippie-oriented show that's ever been seen.
You weren't wearing a beard too, were you?
Yeah, beard. And one of the Toronto papers said if it was any more laid back, it would be asleep.
Oh, well. Were you impressed with yourself after Mount Hanley song? I mean, was it the record you wanted to make? I should have said that in a better way, yeah. So, well, no, what I'm getting at is there wasn't another release for a long time after that. So what happened? You were still doing the acting and all that stuff, but there was a long hiatus between records.
Yes, there was, indeed. I didn't make another record until you could make them yourself at home.
Were you still writing during that gap?
Yeah. I wasn't writing a lot. I'm trying to think where we were talking about. I wrote a few songs in Canada. I played quite a lot in Canada. I had a band up there that I played with quite a lot. French-Canadian, Acadian, from Cajun guys. I eventually went back to L.A. thinking I would re-establish myself as a TV starlet, and, nothing. So I played music around and about. Eventually, I stayed back in L.A. until I moved over here. Did all right. Nothing spectacular, nothing high-profile, but getting by and doing all right all the time.
When did you move back to England, Noel?
Almost 7 years ago.
Well, you've been pretty productive because you've released quite a few albums in the 21st century. You've been quite productive. New artists don't release as many albums as you in such a short space of time.
Not that many.
You've done 4 here, according to my list.
One is a compilation, the Reprise stuff, and that is called...
Is that Life is a Dream?
Life is a Dream, yeah. And one is Hold Back Time, which I did in L.A. One is Live from Boulevard Music, and the fourth one I did a one-man show about Jacques Brel, so that's the fourth one.
Obviously you were a Jacques Brel fan.
Yeah, I saw him in the 60s. I was absolutely blown away.
Did you ever meet him?
No.
He died tragically young too, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
Noel, there was this thing called the RPM Challenge. Now, can you explain a little bit of that? What exactly was the RPM Challenge?
Well, it's a radio station in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in the United States, that started this about 4 or 5 years ago. They just said, we're going to do a challenge on the radio station, and we're going to invite anyone who wants to write and record 10 songs during the month of February. And my youngest son, Will, who's a musician, he started doing it about 3 years ago, and he talked me into doing it this past year. So I said, are you mad? But it was absolutely extraordinary to be under that pressure and do that. I was so high on it after the month was over and I'd actually accomplished it. I'd hardly keep my feet on the ground.
Do they do this every year, do they not?
They do, yes. I mean, they have tens of thousands of entries. Have you looked at their website?
No, I haven't, no, but I will do.
RPMchallenge.com, yeah.
Are you going to do it again?
It certainly stirs up my creative juices.
And did Will have a go too, being a musician himself?
Yeah, he's done it 3 years in a row, yeah.
You had a famous father, and Will's got a famous father too. So is he coping as well as you coped with a famous father?
Yeah, and I mean, I think he got a lot more support than I did from my dad. My dad didn't like me being in show business very much. He didn't like me being an actor.
He did all right from it.
Yeah, I know he did, but he thought he was the exception. And he liked my music, though. He did like that.
Was he supportive in later life?
Yeah, he liked my music. He approved of that. He didn't approve of my acting.
You're still active there, Noel? You're still writing songs and playing? It sounds like you are.
Yeah, well, I haven't actually written a song since February.
So what, does it take an incident to inspire you, or do you just have to lock yourself away with a guitar or the old Steinway?
Yeah.
Have you still got the old Steinway?
No, God, I never qualified for the Steinway. I wouldn't have room in my house anyway. Yeah, I mean, start to do it, Use whatever you need.
So what, do you sit down and say, I'm going to write a song today, or just does it hit you out of the blue? Or
I find tune comes first. I start playing chords on the guitar, and I have these tunes start coming into my head, and then shortly the lyrics sometimes come right with the tune or right after it. It's a concentrated process. But I mean, some of them come really easy, and some of them are a bit of a struggle.
How did the RPM challenge, when you're forced into doing it in quick time, did it change the process?
No, it accelerated the process, that's all. I'm one of those people, I tend to work well to deadlines. I tend to sit on my ass if I don't have a deadline, to do nothing, or enjoy myself, or see my kids, or hang out. I need a little pressure. I'm actually, curiously enough, going into the local studio here on Saturday and putting down 4 tunes with a friend of mine that plays guitar. And I'm re-recording the 3 Old Time songs. And I'm also going to record a couple of country tunes under the name of Tex Harrison. That had a ring to it, doesn't it?
It's a good ring. You must like the country music, because the Great Electric Experiment is over, your 1969 album. There's very country-ish feel to that, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, indeed. Funnily enough, the guy that played lead guitar all the time on that, I'm going to forget his name too, he's a great jazz player, he's dead now, Herb Ellis. He's known as a jazz player, but he grew up in Texas, so he actually played country music unbeknownst to any of his fans, and he played on that with me. But yeah, and especially once I went to live in Nova Scotia, I mean, I missed all the 70s popular music and just listened to country music up there.
You still churn out a calypso tune or anything like that?
No, I did. I wrote a calypso. The man who was the presenter for the Tonight program where I sang the news in calypso turned 90 last year. I wrote a calypso for him and sent it to him.
All right, Noel. Well, look, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very much for taking time to talk with us. I just want to say your albums have given me lots of pleasure. The further I've delved into your music, the more I've enjoyed it. My opinion is you're underappreciated, and that's why we're doing the show.
Well, thank you very much. And if I get the chance to come out there and play, I'll do it.
Love to see you. Have you ever been to Australia?
I was in Sydney for 10 days about 20 more years ago. 25 years ago, for a television show. It was a dramatic show. I can't remember what it was called. It was an episode of some TV drama.
An Australian program or an English one?
No, it was an American program.
Anyway, Noel, pleasure to talk to you.
It's great talking to you, Nick, too.